Hello, welcome to the Women Fantasy Authors YouTube channel. I'm Janet Hanker, and my guest today is author and podcaster Johanna Wittenberg. Welcome, Johanna.
Thank you, Janet. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally were able to make it happen. This is really great. We're going to be discussing your Norse Women series, which you have 6 books so far, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. And to start out, I'd like to read the book blurb for book 5, which is The Queen of Hell. And that's the book that I read to get prepped for our interview today. So let me read this to give readers an idea of where we're going with the depth of your stories. Here is the blurb from Queen of Hell. Norway, AD 824. The evil queen in the mound is dead, the Irish necklace held fast in her ghoulish grip. Undisturbed, the queen's curse lies dormant, but Ronhild attempts to retrieve the necklace, unleashing a pestilence on Tromoy.
That's right.
As her people sicken and die, Asa must seek the cure in the other world, leaving behind her beloved son behind. She travels alone to the dark world deep underground, a place from which mortals never return, the realm of hell itself. So that's quite a story we're dealing with. So of course, I have to start out by asking you what started your interest in Viking and Norse mythology and what inspired you to write this series?
Well, I have a Scandinavian background, and I grew up in Minnesota, where Vikings are very big there. And many years ago, when I was still in college, my mother, who was an artist of Norwegian descent, she was full-blooded Norwegian. She created a series of images that revived the ornamental style that we're familiar with in the wood carvings and the metalworking. But it was also in their weaving and many of their other arts that have somewhat been, most of which have been lost to us.
Mm-hmm.
So mom, in the research that she did, she went to Scandinavia, made several trips, and she took me along. So when I was still in college, I helped her with her research, and we went to Oslo, and she introduced me to all the wonderful museums and artifacts in Oslo, especially the Viking Ship Museum there,
Oh,
which is
wonderful.
being rebuilt, by the way. It's not there right now. You can't visit it at the moment. It's going to reopen in 2027, but it's an amazing place. And one of the biggest exhibits that really caught my attention was the Oseberg burial ship. And it's very
Mhm.
famous. It's when you see pictures of Viking ships, you're probably going to see a picture of the Oseberg ship because it was the most well preserved. It's a 70-foot long ship, and it had most of its contents were there. Everything from cooking and beds and sleds and a cart. Lots of animals were sacrificed, but this was the burial of 2 women. There
Wow.
were no men in this magnificent, huge mound that had a 70-foot Viking ship in it. Uh, and so that got me thinking about, how were women treated? How were they viewed in Norse times, in Viking times? And, we have so much of the men being, big brutes and the women being subservient, and that is not at all the case. So, and we'll talk a little more about that later.
Well, that is awesome. It sounds like a wonderful place to visit. And that kind of leads into my next question, because I wanted to ask about Queen Asa. And at the beginning of the story, and in most fantasy, often in fantasy, there's a king and queen with the woman taking a secondary role. But as you just referred to, in this case, she's in charge and she's taking care of her people. So what else did you find out in your research, especially about women that might have been in a queen role or a leadership role like Asa?
Well, she's one of the most famous Viking Age queens, especially in Scandinavia. She was a real Norse queen. She really lived. She ruled alone for 18 years. And the story behind her is that uh, a neighboring king wanted to take her for a wife, and her father, who was a king, refused. So
Mhm.
the King Gudrud, who wanted to marry her, came down and killed her father and brother and took Osa captive and forced her to marry him. Uh, well, she bided her time, and when she regained and had a child, and when she gained enough of power of her own, she killed Gudrid and took control of her father's kingdom. And
Wow.
she had every right to do that in Norse society. In fact, not only was vengeance considered a right, it was considered a duty. So she was
Hmm.
fulfilling her duty. And when she went back to Tromoy, which is where they were from, she refused to marry anyone else. And she ruled on her own for nearly 20 years until her son came of age and took over the kingdom from her. And she had no other children either. So that's how we know she was never married again.
Wow. Well, no wonder I love the content of your story so much. It has so much behind it, and it was so rich, and her character was developed really well. So yeah, that's really great to hear about her character. Um, from the story, you can tell we're going to be visiting Hell, because she has to go on a quest. And one of the things that I was really intrigued about was your description of hell and what it was like in Norse culture, because we're used to heaven and hell, good and bad. And in your story, it's much more complicated than that. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the structure of hell as we're going to see it in the story, or also in mythology, and some of the beings that are residing there.
It's a fascinating place, and it's one of the places that is described in quite a bit of detail in the sagas and the legends. So I was able to research it and make a portrayal of hell that, in my opinion, is very accurate according to what the Vikings actually believed. So first of all, we start out with Yggdrasil, which is the world tree. And the world tree can in the world tree, in its branches, are the realms of the gods and the light elves. Uh, Middle Earth is the center of the tree, and that's where we live. And Tolkien got all this
Yeah,
from
I
the
just got
saga.
that when you said
Yep,
Middle
yep,
Earth.
yep. Middle Earth, and so then beneath the roots are realms also, the realms of the dwarves, the realms, and one of the places is the realm of hell. And to get there, you have to crawl under the roots of Yggdrasil. And there's an evil serpent Nighog who's gnawing at the roots of the world tree. And when he gnaws through, the world will end. That's when Ragnarok will occur. But meanwhile, you'd have to sneak past him, and then get into the um, you get into the dark valleys. They're so dark and deep that you can't see anything. And you have to travel through the dark valleys for 9 days and nights. Of course, time has no meaning there because you never see the sun, but eventually you come out of it. Um, then you have to cross the river of knives and swords. It's over a bridge that's roofed with gold where a battle is going on continuously. And this bridge is guarded by a Jotun woman named Modguder, and she is an armed shield maiden. So you have to get past her, and then you have to get through this battle that's going on. Um, After that, you come to a forest of steel, and that's where a, another Jotun woman named Angerboda lives, and she is the mother of hell, as
Okay.
well as she's the mother of the Midgard serpent, and she is the mother of Fenrir the wolf. She's the common law wife of Loki, as whom
Okay.
everyone's heard of Loki.
Name familiar. We're very familiar
Yes.
with. Yeah.
So
Okay.
she gave birth to these monstrous children. Hell herself is half a woman who's half corpse and half living, or half black and half flesh colored.
Hmm.
And the gods were so afraid of these three monstrous children that they found ways to capture them. So Fenrir the wolf was bound with a magical chain. Um, the Midgard serpent Jormungandr was thrown into the ocean, and Hel, the girl, she was cast down into the land of the dead, where she became the ruler of the land of the dead. So Odin gave her dominion over the dead.
Wow.
But there's wolves, there's the hellhound Gorm. The door to the gate is guarded by a Jotun who you have to answer his riddles. That's another thing Tolkien came up with
Mhm. Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
saga. And there's also a rooster with a comb that's made up of the northern lights.
This
This
is
rooster
amazing.
doesn't, yeah, and this rooster is one of the three roosters that will crow when Ragnarok begins.
Okay.
It's really interesting.
Well, that explains why it's such an action adventure story, because she's going there and she has to go through all these obstacles and through all these brutal places to try to retrieve this artifact, which is a necklace. And I wanted to ask you about the necklace. Is that also something out of history? Is that a real thing?
Yes and no. When I went to Dublin, I went to the Irish Museum of National Museum of Archaeology, and there they had a display of ancient gold. It's from, the very early times, 2500 BC, and so there were gold necklaces and other kinds of jewelry, and that's where I got the idea for this necklace. There isn't a specific one that's mentioned in legend, but I'm basing mine on this gold exhibit because
Mhm.
they're sure that these gold this gold jewelry had magical connotations.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? That they
Mhm.
would, in a lot of the ancient cultures as well. I wanted to let people know that you have a podcast, Shield Maidens, Women of the Norse World, and I will put a link down to that underneath the video here. But I wanted to know a little bit about Shield Maidens, if you can tell us what their history or purpose was.
Well, they appear in legends a lot. I mean, the first one we know about is Brunhilde, who was
Of course, yeah,
a legendary one, but there's quite a few others. And they were, for a long time, they were considered simply a matter of a myth. They weren't real. However, recently, there have been some archaeological discoveries that show some of the burials that we thought were men were
mm,
actually women buried with swords, with horses, with weapons of all different kinds and armor. And of course, the most famous one right now is BJ 581, which is in Birka, Sweden, on the island of Birka. This woman was buried with great honors, and she was they were sure it was a man's burial. She was Her grave was excavated in the 1850s, but the person who excavated it documented it so well, and later they were able to identify the bones as a woman's, partly by DNA, but also by the
yeah,
pelvic structure.
right.
But there have been other burials of shield maidens where women they were buried with weapons, they had battle injuries. Um, so we know that they did exist. How many, we don't know for sure. How many burials have been misidentified, because up until recently they simply identified burials as male or female by the grave goods.
Right. Now, so they would be right in the front of the battle with the men, correct? They would be right there in the heat of battle.
Oh yeah, yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense from what I've heard about Norse culture. So another thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of cultures is the mixing of cultures, because one of your characters has shown up from Ireland. And did you find out something historically about cultures blending in that time period? Because I always thought of the Vikings as they were Vikings, and that's who you only got to see in history, when they were a group of people and they were solid and they were exclusive of other cultures. So what did you find out?
Well, recent archaeological evidence has shown us that there was quite a mix of different kinds of people in a Viking war band. So, Viking was that they didn't use the term Viking, of course, by the way,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they had war bands and they were bonded to their leaders. You could say band of brothers, although sometimes they had sisters in there too, but they weren't necessarily all Scandinavian. There's evidence that some of these people were from other places, like even um, you know, the Vikings were very far traveled. So they picked up people who maybe were slaves, but also could have joined the war band if they were great warriors.
mm,
So,
right, right. That makes a lot of sense because we do
mhm.
know that from history how much they traveled. Although I think they're finding out more all the time. Um, the map at the beginning of the book is southern Norway. So obviously, from what you said so far, you're dealing with real places and real geography. Um, and so It's from what you've told us so far, a tremendous amount of your story has been drawn from real history and from real places. And the descriptions of the place in your story is really, really beautiful. And I really enjoyed the descriptions that you had of the sailing, of the traveling on the ships. And I was wondering if you actually sailed yourself, or did you just get that information from your research?
No, I was a sailor for about 20 years of my life. And so at first I was a cruising sailor living on a sailboat and learned all the techniques of sailing that have come in very handy with my Viking stories. Then later I was a ship's officer
Oh,
on
wow.
on a research vessel, and we traveled to Antarctica, to Alaska, all over the place. So I have a lot of sailing experience.
Yeah, well, it comes through in the story. It's really, really good. I felt like I was right there in the with the smells and the sights of everything. So that was really, really wonderful. You and your husband travel a lot, and tell us where you met your husband.
We met on a ship bound for Antarctica.
Wow.
We both worked for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and at that time the ship was getting ready to sail for Antarctica. I was already a ship's officer, and he came aboard as the chief engineer. So we got to know each other that way.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. I love that you've gotten to travel so much too. Let's see. Book 6 is out. I haven't read that yet. And I wanted to let people know that I jumped in, right in the middle of everything in book 5. And it was I read it, it was perfectly fine as a standalone, although there were some references to previous events that had happened earlier. Of course, I recommend that you start at book 1, but I think each one is really rich in detail and has enough story that you'll be fine wherever you decide to start. What is next for you? More on this or something new?
No, I'm working on book 7. Uh,
Great.
I don't know how many books I'm going to end up writing. I'm just going to keep writing until it's done. And I've occasionally thought about, oh, what if I start a new series? But I don't really have any interest in doing that right now. I'm just totally
Yeah.
caught up in this world at the moment.
Yeah. Well, there's so much to draw from. And with your background and history, I could see you going for quite a few more books, which I hope you do, because it's such a wonderful world that you've created that's so realistic because of the history and lore that you've pulled into the story. So I look forward to that. What was your favorite part about writing this particular book, The Queen of Hell?
Oh, well, I really love the research. I'm a research nerd, and I like that I could go to the sources and pull all these sources together and create the world and bring it to life. I'm one of those people who wishes I could time travel. So I'm always trying to make these places real. And that was the best part. I really enjoyed some of the humor that I was able to put in this book. Not all the books have a lot of humor, but this one um, I was able to put some funny characters in there as well as some scary ones.
Right, right. Well, let me take a minute to share my screen because we have a graphic for you. And oh, it sort of, I don't know if that's hiding it might be hiding your last name, Johanna Wittenberg. And there is the beautiful 6 books in the series so far. You can find her at johannawittenberg.com. I'll have a link down below the video here. And also, tell us a little bit about your podcast, and I'll also link to that as well.
Well, a little over a year ago, I teamed up with another author, K.S. Barton. She also writes about Viking Age women. And we had done so much research, and we met at an online conference. And she said she'd always wanted to do a podcast, and would I be interested in doing it with her? So what we do is we share our research, which, believe it or not, we've done 14, 15 episodes already.
Wow.
Our plan in the future is to interview more people. We have interviewed one author so far, but we always think, oh, we just don't have enough, and we do. We have plenty. So we've covered. We have a couple of episodes on Shieldmaidens because there's
Oh,
a lot
good.
of information, both the archaeological evidence as well as the mythological or legends. And then we have gone into sorceresses who were very prominent in the Viking Age, uh, and women in history, the queens. So we've really done a lot. We have a few more ideas that we're going to work on. We want to work on things like women had specific tasks that were seemed to have had a religious
Oh,
significance, and men were kind of afraid to be around them, and weaving was one of them. Weaving was considered a magical art. So anyway, there's just so much lore, and also much more new archaeological evidence that they're discovering every day.
well, I think you're going to keep writing this for a long time.
I do too.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you one last question because we're kind of bumping up against our time frame here. Where it is the most favorite place you have traveled through? Maybe you've already answered that, but you've traveled a lot. So what are some of your favorite places to travel?
Well, I really love the Mayan ruins, and I've spent quite a bit of time at different Mayan ruins on the East Coast.
Hmm.
But Norway
Of
is
course.
a fabulous place. It is one of the most beautiful countries in the
Hmm.
world. The people are extremely nice. And if you're interested in Viking, they have got a lot of replica halls, Viking halls, reenactors, the ships, and the museums are just amazing. So
Wow.
I can definitely recommend Norway if you're interested in Vikings.
I am. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but it sounds wonderful. I especially would love to see the museum with a ship. That sounds fantastic. But I'll search around online and see what I can find. Okay, let's see. I think that's about it for today. I thank you so much for coming and talking with me. I had so many questions because the story was so intriguing around history, and I'm always interested in research as well. So it was great that you could come and talk with us about that today. Um, I will be posting, like I said, the links below. Please give us a like, and if you follow the channel, you'll get notified when I'm doing new interviews and post them up. And we can have more exciting discussions like we had today. Johanna, again, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It was great.